So we kick the bottom, and she comes out with the little girl, and she says, call 911. My name is Amanda Berry.
Robert McDonough.
Well, sometimes timing is everything, Aaron and Shannon, and good news and a happy ending right now. The gentleman behind us you're looking at, that is Robert McDonough.
If you saw this in a movie, you'd think, no, there's no way. In May of 2013, an elderly man named Robert McDonough went missing from his Leamington, Maine home. The danger was compounded by the fact that McDonough has dementia. The authorities were called and searched the nearby woods throughout the night, but found nothing. The next morning, a local news crew stationed themselves outside McDonough's house to report on his disappearance. And that is when McDonough quite literally strolled into the shot and asked the news crew what was happening. McDonough was safe and healthy, and it was reported that he had wandered out of his house and likely into the neighboring forest.
This is you identifying as Bob McDonough?
I think so. It's Bob McDonough. Yeah. He looks a lot like a
Watch
guy.
yourself.
Yeah.
The rescue team may have just missed him during their search. Number 19. Timothy Carney. A young New Jersey man named Timothy Carney went missing in September of 2004 after calling his employer and telling him that he would be late for work. That night, Carney's empty vehicle was discovered near Newark. His parents searched years for their son, and he was finally found safe on September 23, 2011, nearly 7 full years from the day he disappeared. Unfortunately, not much information was given regarding his situation. Carney's parents believe that he was influenced by a religious organization known as the Gospel Outreach to abandon all contact with his family. Number 18. Carlos de Salazar. A Spanish doctor by the name of Carlos Sanchez Ortiz de Salazar disappeared from the city of Seville in 1996. The story goes that de Salazar was severely depressed and fled his home country to begin a new life elsewhere. There was no further news, and de Salazar was even declared legally dead in 2010. 5 years after that, mushroom pickers found de Salazar living in the woods of Tuscany, Italy.
Damn, I'm sorry. Oh, damn and blasted. I'm sorry. Shh. You shmee. 18 years of total silence and you shmee.
De Salazar told them who he was and proved it by showing them some documents. Photos of these documents were later shared with a missing persons organization. Unfortunately, this story has a frustratingly ambiguous ending. After being found, de Salazar had taken down his makeshift home and once again fled into the wilderness to be on his own. Number 17. Jan Broberg. Today, Jan Broberg felt is a professional actress, having found success on stage and fame on the WB's Everwood, in which she portrayed Nurse Louise. Unfortunately, Bromberg suffered a harrowing childhood that involved multiple kidnappings. Back in 1972, Bromberg's parents met the Bergdahl family through church. Bromberg quickly developed a father-daughter relationship with Robert Bergdahl.
Bergdahl and Brombergs became friends, and they trusted each other, and that's just the way Bob Bergdahl wanted.
Unfortunately, Bergdahl kidnapped Bromberg and took her to his trailer home in Mexico.
I don't think he's kidnapped her. He's just gone someplace with her. And he had to drill that into our minds. He kidnapped her.
She was eventually rescued, but then kidnapped again 2 years later. And the now teen proceeded to live with Bergdahl in California for 4 months. She was eventually rescued by the FBI, and her story was later turned into the Netflix documentary, Abducted in Plain Sight. Number 16. Petra Pitka. Back in 1984, Petra Pitka was due to arrive at her brother's birthday party, but she never made it. A suspected criminal then confessed to killing Pitka. The case was closed in 1989, with many believing that Pitka had been killed. There was no further news until 2015, when police were called to a home burglary in Dusseldorf. The victim said her name was Mrs. Schneider, but eventually came clean. She was actually the presumed dead Petra Pitka. She had been living under a false identity for over 30 years. When found, Pitka refused to give a reason for her disappearance and explicitly asked not to be reunited with her family. However, she also claimed that family troubles were not the reason for her sudden departure. Number 15. Harold Lovell. This is another person who was presumably killed. But this wasn't at the hands of some random criminal. It was at the hands of John Wayne Gacy.
I've always told people when I got into clown makeup, I regressed into childhood.
Many believed that Harold Wayne Lovell was killed by Gacy back in the late 70s, but his body was never identified. In the early 2010s, police were attempting to identify some unknown Gacy victims when they started looking into Lovell.
We have a shot of all of the victims together here. And when you look over at the photos, I have no recollection of any of them. Never met them.
Their search took them across the country to South Florida, which is where they made a shocking discovery. Lovell was alive and well, and he didn't even know that he was presumed dead, let alone a victim of Gacy's, whom he had actually met and worked for before his disappearance. According to Lovell, he had fled Chicago following some family troubles and stayed out of contact for the following 30-odd years. Number 14, Julian Hernandez. In this case, a simple college application uncovered a 13-year-long ruse. In August of 2002, young Julian Hernandez was taken by his father Bobby. Bobby had left behind a note for Julian's mother, saying only that he had taken their son. No other details were given, and father and son seemingly disappeared into thin air. They had actually gone to Cleveland and developed new identities, with Bobby obtaining a Social Security guard under the name Jonathan Mangina.
This is the house where young Julian Hernandez was living with his dad, a stepmom, and a little stepsister. He was an honor student, headed to college in the fall, and then his world came crashing down with the discovery that he was missing, and he didn't even know it.
The ruse finally ended when Julian applied for college in 2015. A school counselor discovered that Julian was legally missing and notified authorities. 19-year-old Julian, who has forgiven his father, was then reunited with his mother, and Bobby was sentenced to 4 years in prison.
Who wants to talk about all the bad things he's done, and I think that he's done a lot of good.
Number 13, Steve Carter. Imagine this. You're browsing online when you come across your own picture on a website of missing children. That's exactly what happened to Steve Carter.
So I had a couple free minutes at lunch and went on missingkids.com, pulled up Hawaii 34 years male, and lo and behold, that was the picture that came up.
After reading about a kidnapping, Carter found himself on the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children's page, after which he saw an age progression photo of a missing child. He thought that the grown man's face bore a startling resemblance to his own, so he contacted the police and they got to work.
To see yourself and to realize that, you know what, people have been looking for you for that long, I was shell-shocked.
Turns out that Steve Carter was actually Marks Barnes, and he had gone missing over 30 years earlier after going for a walk with his mother. It's believed that Carter's mother took him to an orphanage and put him up for adoption under a false name. She then disappeared herself, leaving behind many frustrating questions. Number 12, Denise Boler. It's amazing how much trouble money can cause. Back in 1985, 24-year-old Denise Boler went missing while working as a bookkeeper. The only clue was a note left to her husband which read, quote, "We have your wife." While the police received many tips over the years, Boler was eventually tracked by a private investigator and found in 2002.
There didn't seem to be any answers to this riddle.
With the most shocking twist coming at the very end.
She was living in Florida under the name Denise James. According to Boler, she had fled to hide from her old boss. Boler had skimmed more than $10,000 from the company of her boss's wife, allegedly on the orders of her employer. When Boler began discussing the ruse, her co-conspirator reportedly threatened to kill her. She fled to live a new life and has since been reunited with her parents.
She wrote the ransom note, drove to the airport, paid cash for a plane ticket, and disappeared.
Number 11, Brenda Heist. On the morning of February 8, 2002, Brenda Heist dropped her children off at school and disappeared without a trace.
At the age of 54, her daughter was 8. Her son was 12 when Heist chose to walk away.
The family was understandably devastated, and Heist's husband petitioned to have her declared legally dead. The case was solved in 2013 to mixed results. Heist intentionally left her family in Pennsylvania behind to live as a homeless person in Florida. She had hitchhiked there with a group of people without homes and spent the next decade working odd jobs in the state. According to Heist, she had abandoned her family for stress-related reasons. But this story does not have a happy ending. Heist's husband claimed that he had no desire to see her, and her now grown daughter doesn't think her mother, quote, deserves to see her.
I don't know that I've ever stopped crying and started living, to be honest with you.
Number 10, Michele Whitaker. South Carolina woman Michele Whitaker went missing in August of 2002 after a friend gave her a lift to a truck stop.
Is she walking around somewhere? Is she okay, or is she laying in a ditch somewhere?
I don't want to go to my grave not knowing what's happened to my daughter.
Her case later turned into a homicide investigation, and police suspected a man named Jonathan Vick. Vick was the boyfriend of Whitaker's co-worker, and she had also gone missing. However, police were unable to prove that Vick killed Whitaker. The case went cold until 2008. An Oregon woman was watching a Forensic Files episode about Vick when a picture of Whitaker flashed on screen. The woman recognized Whitaker as her neighbor and contacted the authorities. Her neighbor was indeed the missing Michele Whitaker, and she later told her family that she had fled South Carolina to start a new life in Oregon.
I was still asleep and the phone rang and I answered it, and it was Alan Wood from the police department. He said, "We found Shelley and she's alive."
Number 9. Gabrielggie. When one hears fugue state, they probably think of that Breaking Bad episode where Walt walks around a supermarket in his birthday suit. Well, that was reality for Gabrielggie. Back in January of 1987, the husband and father disappeared under mysterious circumstances. He was reported missing after he failed to return home for lunch, and his burned-out vehicle was later discovered. Naggie remained missing until 2012, when a police officer tracked him down and found him alive and well. Naggie had seemingly suffered a dissociative fugue state, a rare psychiatric disorder characterized by a loss of memory of one's identity and personality. Put simply, Naggie forgot who he was and wandered away to start a new life.
I was walking down some road or highway with a lot of headlights, and I remember feeling fear.
Number 8. Lula Hood. There's just something about Florida that apparently attracts people. A woman named Lula Hood went missing all the way back in 1970. According to Hood's relatives, she simply disappeared from Illinois without a trace. No word was heard until 1996, when Hood's family was told that her remains were found in a Florida brickyard.
That it was her, but at that time they couldn't do DNA because it wasn't that advanced yet. We had a memorial service.
That remained the official story until 2009, when the remains were tested for DNA. Surprise, they didn't belong to Hood. The case was reopened, and investigators eventually tracked Hood to another place in Florida where she'd been living for the last 40 years. According to Hood's daughter, Hood got into a squabble with a family member and was told to leave. She did, going all the way to Florida and living her life in complete anonymity. Number 7. Nen Tian. Vietnamese high school student Nen Tian vanished in 1992. Phan returned home but found herself locked out because of the late time, so she relocated to a nearby karaoke bar. The next morning, a disoriented Phan woke up in China. She had been taken to the country by a woman named Tian, who tortured her and her friends and forced them to marry older local Chinese men. She eventually fled with the help of a local driver and returned to Hanoi. In a moment that would be too unbelievable for fiction, Phan approached a man on the street and asked for directions. That man happened to be her uncle. He took her to the family home, and Phan was reunited with her family after 21 years. Number 6. Amanda Eller. Yoga teacher and physical therapist Amanda Eller decided to go for a hike through the Hawaiian wilderness. She never returned home, and her boyfriend quickly reported her missing. Her vehicle was found abandoned near Maui's Kahakapau Trail, but there were no signs of Eller. She had accidentally wandered off the trail and found herself in the middle of the remote wilderness. When it was obvious that help wasn't coming, she was forced to live off wild plants, berries, and rainwater. After over 2 long and grueling weeks, Eller was finally located by a search party and rescued via helicopter.
The last 17 days of my life have been the toughest days of my life. And it's been a really significant spiritual journey.
She was in surprisingly good condition and was treated at a local hospital for a fractured leg.
I'm just a girl that got lost in the woods, and you guys showed up hard. This is true aloha.
Number 5. Michelle Knight, Amanda Berry, and Georgina DeJesus. This is easily one of the most famous kidnapping stories of our time, having attained fame through its dramatic conclusion. Between 2002 and 2004, a man named Ariel Castro kidnapped the 3 women off the streets of Cleveland by offering them lifts. They remained in his house for roughly a decade and were subjected to various forms of horrible torture. It wasn't until May 6, 2013, that Barry saw her chance of escape. Castro had accidentally left a door unlocked, and Barry was able to contact passing neighbors.
So we kick the bottom, and she comes out with the little girl, and she says, call 911. My name is Amanda Berry.
They helped Barry and her daughter escape the house, and she telephoned the police to report the kidnappings, after which the other two were rescued. Castro was arrested that same day, and he would later take his own life in his detention cell.
I spent 11 years in hell. Now your hell is just beginning.
Number 4. Stephen Stainer.
25 years ago, the nation was shocked and overjoyed to hear that 2 missing children had been found alive.
On December 4th, 1972, young Stephen Stainer was abducted by Irvin Murphy and Kenneth Parnell. Stainer proceeded to live as Parnell's son, while being continuously subjected to his depraved whims. Parnell attempted to use Stainer in other kidnappings, but Stainer was uncooperative. In fact, on the night of March 1st, 1980, he and a young boy named Timmy White escaped Parnell's house and made their way to a local police station. Stainer was finally reunited with his family the following day. He wasn't the boy they remembered, but a teenager now. He found it difficult to adjust and mostly kept his experiences to himself. After Stainer died in a motorcycle accident at age 24, Timmy White served as a pallbearer. Number 3. Jaycee Dugard.
For 18 years, she was forbidden to say her own name, so this is how her book, A Stolen Life, begins.
Little Jaycee Dugard was tased and snatched off the street while approaching her school bus on June 10, 1991. The perpetrators were husband and wife duo Philip and Nancy Garrido. Despite numerous people witnessing the kidnapping, the trail went cold, and no one heard anything of Dugard for the next 18 years. In that time, Dugard was consistently assaulted by Philip Garrido and bore him 2 daughters. The case was finally broken by a special events manager named Lisa Campbell. Garrido was visiting UC Berkeley with his 2 daughters, and their, quote, erratic behavior caught Campbell's attention. After getting his name through the booking of an appointment, she notified the police, which eventually led to Garrido's arrest. Dugard was finally rescued and reunited with her mother on August 27, 2009, now almost 30 years old.
Do you worry at some point they'll want to see him?
I want them to make their own choices in life, and if that's something that they need to do, then...
Really? You'd be okay with that?
I wouldn't be okay with it, but I wouldn't not let them do it.
Number 2. Bo Bergdahl. In May of 2009, soldier Bo Bergdahl was working counterinsurgency in Afghanistan when his friend and fellow officer Brian Bradshaw was fatally hit by a roadside bomb. This likely tarnished Bergdahl's outlook on the war effort. He wrote to his family a few days later, and his email was full of critical language against the U.S. Army. Bergdahl subsequently disappeared under mysterious circumstances on June 30th.
Of all the questions swirling around this young man, perhaps the most intriguing is why did he leave his base in the first place?
No one knew where he was, and it would be almost a month before an insurgent group revealed that they were holding Bergdahl prisoner. He served as a POW until May 31, 2014, when he was freed in exchange for Taliban prisoners.
We learned today that doctors are so worried about his mental health after 5 years in Taliban custody that they've told his family not to reach out even just to say welcome back.
Later investigation showed that Bergdahl was likely snatched after abandoning his post. He was subsequently court-martialed and demoted. Talk about a not-so-welcome home. Number 1. Elizabeth Smart.
Violently ripped from her own home and her own bed in the middle of the night.
Back in June of 2002, a man named Brian David Mitchell broke into the Smart household and abducted teenager Elizabeth Smart from her bedroom. Her sister, Mary Catherine, was also in the room at the time of the abduction, but faked being still sleeping. Elizabeth remained with Mitchell and his wife for the next 9 months. Mary Catherine suddenly realized that the man who took her sister was the same man who had worked on their house as a general laborer one day. A sketch of the man was drawn up and released to news outlets. One day, while walking in Sandy, Utah, several eyewitnesses recognized Mitchell's face and notified police of his location. He and his wife were successfully captured, and Smart was finally rescued.
The scariest night of my life happened 11 years ago.
She's sharing her story to help other victims of abuse.
Did you enjoy this video? Check out these other clips from WatchMojo, and be sure to subscribe and ring the bell to be notified about our latest videos.